My name is Evan Cole, and I'm 31. A week ago, I finally bought the house I'd been dreaming about since college. It isn't a mansion, but it's mine. A $750,000 two-story with a porch swing, a barbecue-ready backyard, and a Sunday dinner kitchen. I saved for nearly a decade. I skipped vacations, stayed in a shoebox apartment while friends upgraded, and nursed a dying car past retirement. This house was proof that the sacrifice meant something. The first 3 days after closing, I cleaned, unpacked, and fussed over every detail. Fresh flowers lit up the living room like a model home. It felt like I'd finally stepped into the life I built. I set my new dining table with matching plates and silverware. I even made little name cards because I wanted it to feel special. I invited my parents, Robert and Elaine, my younger brother Dylan, a couple cousins, and close family friends for a small, meaningful housewarming. I pictured us laughing and reconnecting like a real family. The night arrived, and I buzzed with nervous excitement. It felt like a fragile second chance. I checked the roast a dozen times, straightened chairs, and tuned the music to the perfect hum. 6 o'clock hit, so I poured a glass of wine and waited. 6:30 came, then 7, and the food cooled as the candles melted low. By 8, the silence mocked me from every corner. I sat at the beautiful table surrounded by empty plates and the fridge's faint hum. Then my phone rang and my heart jumped. It was my dad, Robert. For a second, I felt relief and imagined some innocent explanation. Maybe they were late, maybe traffic, maybe anything but what came next. His tone was weirdly casual, almost bored. "Hey, Evan," he said, like he'd forgotten why he called. Then he dropped it. "Your brother Dylan thinks the house should be his since he's settling down soon." My fingers tightened around the phone. He said it made more sense because I'd be living here alone. He suggested I sell to Dylan or let him take over the mortgage. My stomach churned and the wine turned sour in my mouth. I asked, voice cracking, what he meant by "should be his." He sighed like I was the unreasonable one and repeated the family man logic. It hit me. They hadn't simply missed dinner. They ignored me on purpose and were already divvying up my dream. I sat in the dim dining room while his words echoed long after the call. It wasn't just the no-show. It was the way he spoke, like my home had been pre-assigned to Dylan. Years of grinding were treated like a footnote. I barely slept that night. My brain replayed every slight I'd brushed aside. The pattern of favoritism snapped into painful focus. When Dylan needed a car down payment, Robert and Elaine co-signed without blinking. When he quit to figure himself out, they gave him rent-free sanctuary. When I got my big promotion last year, they didn't even call. I got a text from Elaine. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Dylan has a new girlfriend?" The message landed like confetti at the wrong parade. The next day, I called Elaine to avoid a fight and just understand. I asked why no one came when I'd cooked enough for everyone. I said a simple text would have been decent. She was airy and dismissive. "We were tired, your dad worked late, and Dylan had plans with his girlfriend," she said. "Besides, you don't need us to celebrate. You've got your house now." I told her it wasn't about the house. I wanted time together. She softened that practiced, manipulative softness. Then she said I should consider what Robert mentioned. "Dylan is under a lot of pressure, and you're single," she added. "It would be such a gift if you helped him get started." Those words landed like a punch. I'd spent years getting started, scraping by on ramen and late nights. Now, I finally had something to show, and they wanted me to hand it over. I ended the call before the frustration boiled over. The pressure didn't stop. Dylan texted, "You should think about selling. The place is too big for you anyway. Move back to your apartment and save." I stared at the message for a long time. The entitlement was radioactive. I didn't respond. A few days later, Robert and Elaine showed up unannounced. I came home from errands to find their car in my driveway and my front door unlocked. They strolled around like buyers on a showing. Elaine beamed and said, "This place is perfect for Dylan and his future family." She pointed at my home office and called it the nursery. I gripped grocery bags so hard the handles dug into my palms. I said quietly, "This is my office." Robert looked right through me. He called it a good starter home for me, but ideal for Dylan now. He said I'd want something bigger later when I meet someone. By then, Dylan would already be settled here, which was the logical thing. My jaw locked, and I said I wasn't selling. Elaine's smile faltered and she called me selfish. She said they were thinking about the family's future. That word, selfish, hung like smoke long after they left. The next week, the favoritism was impossible to unsee. Every call detoured back to Dylan. I mentioned a new project and Elaine asked if the house would be easy to childproof once Dylan moves in. I asked Robert for plumbing advice, and he chuckled. He said it was good practice for maintaining the place for Dylan. Then came the first family dinner since I moved. I showed up hoping to clear the air. Instead, it felt like an ambush. My aunt asked when I'd hand over the keys. A cousin joked about me being the family landlord. Dylan sat there smug, grinning into his glass. "Come on, Evan, you know it's the right thing," he said. He added that I don't even like having people over. He asked what the point was of a big house if it's just me. I swallowed the hurt and forced a smile while my stomach flipped. The house felt different when I got home. It didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a target on my back. Past midnight, I stared at a blank TV and realized I needed a hard line. If I didn't draw it, they'd take everything. 2 days later, Elaine texted me their next move. "We're bringing Dylan by this weekend so he can take measurements for furniture," she wrote. "Make sure you're home." My hands went cold reading it. Measurements. They were treating my home like a foregone conclusion. I put my phone face down and walked to the porch to breathe. The night air was cool, but anger tightened my chest. They weren't hinting anymore. They were making plans for my home without me. By Friday, I still hadn't replied and hoped they'd get the message. I even considered leaving town to dodge their stunt. Saturday morning, a car door slammed in my driveway. I peered out and froze. Robert, Elaine, and Dylan stood there, clipboard and tape measure in hand. They marched up my steps like they owned them. I opened the door before they knocked and asked what they were doing. Elaine chirped that Dylan needed a few quick measurements for his layout. I said there was no layout because he wasn't moving in. Robert frowned and told me to stop making it harder. He said this was what's best for everyone. Before I could answer, Dylan walked in like it was already his. He measured and muttered that the living room was small for his sectional, but workable. Something in me snapped. "Get out," I said, low and sharp. Dylan smirked and told me to stop being dramatic. "Out," I said louder, the word booming off my walls. Elaine gasped like I'd cursed. I shouted "out" again, louder than I meant. The echo startled even me. Dylan rolled his eyes, pocketed the tape, and stormed past. "This isn't over," he said on the way out. The silence afterward was deafening. I stood shaking in the living room, heart pounding. I thought that line in the sand would end it. I was wrong. A new front opened almost immediately. The next week, I came home to a surprise on my porch. It wasn't a package, it was a sold sign leaning on my door. My stomach dropped through the floor. I grabbed it and called my parents in a fury. Elaine answered on the second ring. She said a friend of Dylan's in real estate thought it would be a funny hint. A hint felt like harassment. She told me not to be so sensitive. She said I'd feel better once I let this go. 2 days later, it got worse. I pulled in to find Robert and Dylan with a man in a suit in my driveway. I parked behind them and asked who he was. The man extended a hand and said he was with Harbor & Company, Realty there to do a quick appraisal. I stared at him and then at my father. I asked who requested an appraisal. Robert crossed his arms and said they did. He said I needed to know what the place was worth to make a fair deal for Dylan. He insisted no one was trying to cheat me. I laughed bitterly and told them they had no right to bring anyone without my permission. I told them all to leave. The appraiser looked mortified and packed up quickly. Dylan glared and muttered that I was being ridiculous. After they left, I sat in my car staring at my dream-turned battlefield. That night, Elaine called again. I almost didn't pick up. A small part of me still hoped for an apology. Instead, she proposed something worse. She said if I wouldn't sell, I could at least let Dylan stay part-time until he found his own place. She said it was only fair. I said no, flatly. She told me not to be difficult and said Dylan and his girlfriend Mara would come by with some of their things that weekend. She expected me to be gracious. I hung up with my heart pounding in my ears. They weren't just ignoring me, they planned to move him in without consent. I sat in the dark, staring at the wall. The betrayal burned. Something in me shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. I stopped answering calls and texts and every just checking in voicemail. I needed time and space. They kept pushing anyway. That weekend, I stood at the window with coffee watching the driveway. The quiet felt eerie at first. Around noon, a car rolled in. Dylan and Mara stepped out and popped the trunk. Boxes sat there like a threat. I walked outside before they opened a single flap. "Turn around," I said calmly. Dylan raised an eyebrow and claimed they were just dropping things off because Elaine said so. I cut him off and said I didn't care what Elaine said. "You are not moving anything into this house," I told them. Mara crossed her arms and said I didn't even have a roommate and could use company. I almost laughed at the audacity. I repeated that this is my home and they are not moving in. Dylan slammed the trunk shut. He muttered that I'd regret it and drove away. I stood there long after they left, feeling the weight settle like lead. This wasn't a spat anymore. My own family was trying to take the one thing I'd worked my entire adult life for. The following week was brutal. I struggled to focus and zoned out in meetings. Elaine's selfish line replayed alongside Robert's "do the right thing." Every phone buzz felt like a trespass alarm. I feared coming home to find them on the porch or inside. I stopped inviting friends and stopped cooking in the kitchen I loved. The house felt haunted by their entitlement. I felt like a squatter in my own life. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday. I came home soaked and exhausted to a note taped to my door in Elaine's handwriting. "We brought Dylan by to look at the upstairs bathroom," it read. "He thinks it will work once you clear out your things. Be reasonable. We love you." Clear out your things made my hands shake. I ripped the note down and stood in the rain with my heart pounding. Inside, I sat on the floor staring at the paper. For the first time, I wondered if I should give up, sell the house, take the money, vanish somewhere quiet. It seemed easier than constant war. I thought about the late nights, missed birthdays, and clawed-up promotions. Was all of that just to be treated like a placeholder in my own life? I didn't cry, but the heaviness wouldn't lift. I drifted through rooms for days like a ghost. I barely ate or spoke. Then I found myself in my office staring at a framed leadership award. It was from the year of my biggest promotion, the same year Robert and Elaine forgot to call. That's when it snapped into clarity. They didn't care because they never had to. I'd tried to earn approval by being the responsible son who never needed help. All it won me was a family that thought my work was theirs to claim. I opened my laptop with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. I researched property laws and tenant rights. I looked up home security and legal steps for trespassing. I studied how to set boundaries legally, financially, and emotionally. The next day, I hired a locksmith and changed every lock. I installed a front door camera. I ignored their calls that night. That weekend, I moved my irreplaceables to a safe deposit box. Documents, heirloom jewelry from my grandmother, anything I couldn't risk. If they pushed again, I'd be ready. Preparation calmed me. Then, like clockwork, a new tactic arrived. My mailbox filled with handwritten real estate flyers. Every note chirped, "Ready to sell. Call us today." I knew exactly who seeded that. I sat on my porch with the stack and felt something sharper than anger. Clarity. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one they wouldn't forget. The powerlessness faded. For the first time since closing, I felt in control, even if they didn't know it yet. I started by taking care of myself. I fixed my mornings, cooked real breakfasts, and cleaned with intention. I invited a coworker over for dinner to reclaim the space. Hearing "you must be so proud" was like oxygen. I turned that momentum toward work. I'd been half present and running on fumes. I volunteered for a high-pressure account 2 managers refused. Within a month, I landed one of the quarter's biggest deals. Everything changed on that win. My boss praised me publicly, and a company-wide email highlighted my leadership. A week later, HR offered a significant raise and a bonus. The numbers felt like freedom and leverage. I decided to invest back into the house. I hired a landscaper to transform the front yard. Fresh grass, clean stone walkway, and solar lights up to the porch. It wasn't just aesthetics. It was a statement that this home and I were thriving. I brought in a security company for a full system. Cameras at every entrance, motion sensors, monitored alarm. I wanted eyes everywhere. I also began documenting obsessively. I saved every text, voicemail, and door note. I created a house folder with time-stamped photos, screenshots, and doorbell recordings. Preparation turned into peace. Around then, Robert and Elaine invited me to dinner. Old me would have gone to smooth things over. New me politely declined because I was busy with work. A week later, Dylan texted, "You ready to talk about the house yet?" I replied with one word, "No." For the first time, I felt zero guilt. The pressure attempts dwindled. Calls were less frequent and texts got curt. I sensed they were regrouping. While they plotted, I kept building. A friend at work referred me to attorney Ashley Park. We spent 2 hours going through every angle. She was blunt. They had no legal claim to my property. I wasn't obligated to sell, rent, or share my home with anyone. If they tried to move someone in, I could have them removed. The weight lifted off my chest. I left with a folder of options highlighted in yellow and Ashley's card in my wallet. Then I made the house even harder to touch. A financial advisor helped me move the title into a trust under my name. That made transfers impossible without the trust process. I told no one. I doubled down on myself, joined a gym near the office, and started lifting and running. Every day I felt stronger and clearer. One Friday at sunset, I watched my security feeds on the porch with a glass of wine. For the first time, I wasn't dreading a car in the driveway. I was waiting because I was ready. Then everything went strangely quiet. No calls from Elaine, no pop-ins, not even sarcasm from Dylan. The silence felt wrong. An email from Ashley broke it. "Call me as soon as possible," she wrote. Someone tried to pull my property records at the county clerk's office. My stomach turned, but my mind was steady. She confirmed it wasn't illegal because records are public. She suspected someone was looking for a weakness. With the trust in place, I was protected, but she told me to document intent. That night, I flipped through my legal folder. Fear was gone. Focus remained. This wasn't just about keeping my house anymore. It was about making sure they never tried this again, to me or anyone. Then I remembered a call from months ago. A family friend at a bank had mentioned Robert and Elaine co-signed Dylan's car, and he'd missed payments. Back then, I shrugged it off as not my problem. Now, it was context. I called my friend Neil to ask hypothetically about default and repossession timelines. His answers painted a precarious picture for Dylan. The irony made me laugh out loud. While they were circling my house, their own finances were on thin ice. I formed a plan. Step 1, lock down every legal and practical control. I met Ashley again to walk through trespass, unauthorized occupation, and harassment. We drafted a formal no trespass notice on letterhead, ready to serve. Step 2, separate all house finances. I opened a trust-titled account for mortgage, utilities, and maintenance. That way, no one could claim family money touched the property. Step 3, psychological clarity. I wanted them to know I wasn't afraid without revealing everything. So I started small. When Elaine texted, "Hope you're well, we'd like to stop by soon," I replied, "Please schedule visits in writing with 48 hours notice. Unannounced visits are not allowed." 2 days later, she wrote back, "That's not very family-like, Evan." And I whispered, "They're called boundaries." I shifted into information gathering mode for grim satisfaction. I watched Dylan's socials closely. Fancy dinners and weekend trips popped up while his loans supposedly teetered. I screenshotted everything. Then I saw a new photo from inside my house. The timestamp was that day. I checked my doorbell footage and my stomach dropped. While I was at work, Dylan tried the handle and peered through the glass. He didn't break in, but he was there, watching. I saved the clip and emailed it to myself for a digital timestamp. Then I sent a short text to Ashley. "Got something you'll want to see." She replied the next morning with 3 words. "This is good." I felt stronger with every step. No more reacting, only preparing. I lined up the dominoes and waited for the right moment. The final piece arrived from work. The big project I'd led got extended with a bigger budget and team. My boss offered me the lead. I said yes immediately. It was a promotion and a power move. The raise would let me pay down the mortgage years early. The title boost was credibility my family couldn't ignore. That weekend, I organized a fresh folder on the coffee table. Legal letters, financial docs, camera stills, and screenshots sat in perfect order. I realized I held every card now. I didn't rush. Patience had become my superpower. They expected me to break and hand over the house to avoid conflict. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd done. The chance arrived with a group text from Elaine. "Family dinner tonight at our place, 7 o'clock, she wrote. Normally, I'd ignore it. This time, I saw my opening. I packed the folder, printed doorbell photos, and had Ashley prepare an official cease and desist for harassment and trespass. I drove over as the smell of roast chicken hung in their dining room. The air turned tense as soon as I walked in. Elaine greeted me with a strange smile. "Good you came," she said. Dylan barely looked up from his phone and said, "Finally, we can talk like adults." I sat and said, "You're right. It's time to talk." Robert cleared his throat and gave a lecture about family. He said Dylan and Mara needed a place to start, and I could buy another house. I didn't raise my voice or frown. I simply slid a document across the table. "This is the deed," I said, "and the property is held in a trust under my name." I explained that no one, not even me, could transfer ownership without the trust process. I told them to stop trying to pull records. "It's not going anywhere," I said. Elaine blinked and asked what I meant by "stop trying." I placed Ashley's email confirming the attempted record pull in front of her. I told them not to bother denying it. Robert's face reddened, and he claimed they just wanted to know the value. I slid a photo of the driveway meeting with the appraiser. I said entering my property for an appraisal without consent was trespassing. If it happened again, I would press charges. Dylan finally looked up and said, "I wouldn't do that because we're family." I smiled without warmth. "You thought family meant you could walk over me," I said. "It doesn't." Then I slid the official cease and desist across the table. Elaine's hands shook as she read. She said I was being extreme. I said extreme was showing up with moving boxes and leaving notes telling me to clear out. Dylan scoffed and called me dramatic. I didn't flinch. I laid out printed screenshots of his posts, doorbell stills of him peeking, and a summary from Neil about his missed car payments. I told him plainly that if he came near my property again without permission, the whole file would go to Ashley. I said there would be legal and financial consequences. The room went silent except for the ticking clock. Elaine whispered, "You've changed, Evan." I stood and gathered my folder. I realized being the quiet, responsible son only made it easier for you to take advantage of me. "That ends now," I said at the doorway. I told them I wasn't selling or sharing. I warned that any uninvited step onto my property would be met by police. I left them staring at cold roast chicken, but it wasn't just about that dinner. It was about what I did next. I posted no trespassing signs at my property line. I filed copies of the cease and desist with local police. I sent a formal letter requiring all future house communication go through Ashley. 2 quiet weeks passed. Then Dylan texted, "You didn't have to humiliate us like that." I replied, "You did that yourselves," and felt peace for the first time in months. Peace wasn't my only goal. I wanted deterrence. I prepaid several months of mortgage and automated payments straight from the trust account. The house was locked down legally and financially. No one could touch it but me. Then I threw a real housewarming party. I invited coworkers, friends, and neighbors who actually support me. Laughter, music, and good food filled the rooms that used to echo. We took photos at the dining table, smiling and raising our glasses. I posted the pictures without tagging family. I knew they'd see. The next morning, I had 3 missed calls from Elaine, 2 from Robert, and a long spiral text from Dylan accusing me of tearing the family apart. I didn't reply for days. Messages kept coming in waves. Elaine tried guilt, Robert tried logic, and Dylan tried anger. "Family is all we have," Elaine wrote. "You can't keep us out forever," Robert insisted. "Enjoy playing King of the Castle," Dylan sneered. A week later came the tell. "We went to the police about your letters," Robert messaged. "They said you can't stop family from visiting." I forwarded the text to Ashley. Within 24 hours, she sent them a certified letter spelling out trespass consequences. She included the doorbell footage of Dylan peeking in. 2 days later, Robert sent a shorter message. "Fine, have it your way. Don't expect us to come around anymore." For once, a text made me smile. The real fallout arrived quietly. Remember Dylan's car loan? A few weeks after my party, I drove by and saw a tow truck hauling his car from Robert and Elaine's driveway. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. He'd been behind for months. That night, a neighbor sent me Dylan's social media rant about people who think they're better and his life falling apart. I didn't like, comment, or share. Silence was enough. Weeks turned into months, and the calls finally stopped. No more texts, no more notes on my door, no more surprise visits. The storm passed. The house felt light and warm again. I built a real life inside those walls. I hosted dinners for friends and made the office a space I loved. I planted flowers in the backyard like planting new parts of myself. Every small improvement felt like reclaiming ground. Then, nearly 6 months later, a car slowed in front of my house at sunset. It was Robert and Elaine. My chest tightened for a moment. They idled, then drove away without pulling in. I didn't wave or call after them. I rocked gently on the porch swing and watched the sun disappear. For the first time since the mess began, I felt completely at peace. This house became the boundary line I defended. I sipped the last of my wine and set the glass on the railing. "This is my home, and it always will be," I said to the quiet street. I walked inside and locked the door, not from fear, but choice. The click of that lock sounded different now. It sounded like ownership. It sounded like the end of a battle I won. The kitchen finally smelled like comfort again. The living room felt like mine again. The office wasn't a contested nursery. It was my creative ground. I looked around and saw not just walls. I saw years of sacrifice, proof of resilience, and a line no one crosses again. I breathed easier than I had in months. And that's the story, Reddit. The family that tried to claim my home learned the meaning of boundaries. I learned the power of saying no and backing it with receipts.